Psychiatrists have trouble dealing with the unconscious in a straightforward way. But the unconscious is a purely biological system, not a magical one. It's a biological system because that's all there is for it to be. People aren't happy talking about the unconscious unless there's a certain amount of hokum involved. But there isn't. The unconscious is simply a machine for operating an animal. What else could it be? Most of what we do is unconscious. Turning chores over to the conscious mind is a risky business. Whales and dolphins have to time their breathing to the surface. So of course, when they were first anesthetized for surgery, they simply died, which should have been predictable. The unconscious evolves along with the species to meet its needs. And if there's anything spooky about it, it's that it sometimes seems to anticipate those needs. Can't afford surprises. It's one of the things that troubled Darwin. But the soul doctors don't get any of this. They're Cartesian to the bone. This is mostly a video aimed at people who've already read The Passenger, because it's difficult to approach Stella Maris without its prequel brother piece. In fact, actually, given the subject matter, that is a much more appropriate name. They're like brother and sister, like the ice climbers. I'm going to assume that you've read The Passenger. If you haven't, you need to. Ostensibly, when we approach McCarthy, his career took on so many different forms, and there's different eras that people have talked about. You know, he had stories that were primarily Appalachian in not only subject matter, but also soul. Very much successors to the great Faulkner. Then he got into the westerns, and then a little detour into sci-fi, very famously. A thriller. Some of his most lucrative works were those in which he broke his own mold. I think is how you say that. But coming to the end of a career of such a literary giant, especially here in my own home country, The Passenger and Stella Maris are like a ship, the last ship out of the harbor. I read The Passenger at the beginning of last summer, and I could not put it down. It just had me. It just had me. Had me by the heart. Really did. It's interesting, the bookstore I picked it up from, there's a gentleman who, I believe he's the manager. There have been times where I've gone in and I've asked him for something and he doesn't have it, but instead he makes a recommendation. I forget what it was. Case in point. Where on earth is it? Okay, I organized last week and I can't find anything. I looked right at it and I did not find it. Case in point, I had gone in and asked, I want to say it was for the Pessoa book, right there, the big giant one. And he instead, he says, I don't have that, but you should check this out. And I did, and it was really good. It was really, really good. I'll have to talk about it someday. I had gone in for something, I forget what it was, and he didn't have it. And we start talking about Cormac McCarthy, blah, 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 blah. And he says, please finish this on my behalf because I couldn't. It was too deep. I think I wrote that down. I don't really know what too deep means in his case, but I did make a note for myself that something had put a stop to this gentleman at some point. But inevitably, I figured out what he meant, and it is truly, it truly is a transformative work, very subtle. You almost wonder if somebody like McCarthy would go out on a big note, you know, something to rival the greats like Blood Meridian and Suttree. No, not necessary. Quietly. So after finishing The Passenger, I kind of wasn't super interested in following up with Stella Maris. That was until just a few days ago. I had seen an excerpt which struck me, and I realized that reading Stella Maris was the opportunity to revisit The Passenger in a new light. It's almost as if I was gonna go hike a mountain, but from a different angle, take a different route, in a way. So I decided to dive right in, and once again, I was hooked. I was grabbed by the heart. For those of you who have read The Passenger, and if you haven't, go away, shoo. So as you should know, The Passenger mostly deals with Bobby Western, you know, his story. And we get these little tidbits of Alicia, his sister, while she's in Stella Maris. And Stella Maris, as you can imagine, is, I guess you could say, the other half of the story, but it's I hate to use this analogy, it's DLC for Alicia's story, and it is both a prequel and I hate to say prequel, but it wraps around The Passenger. It takes place during her lifetime, so before the events of The Passenger. But we get so much history, and we get so much of the strange story of this family from the sister's perspective. So much of what we get from her perspective in The Passenger is, as it's happening. And with Stella Maris, we get her recounting her memories and her dreams and her experiences. And it really, in an interesting way, brings these two characters together in a lot of ways, actually. Which is why I kicked so many people out from watching in the beginning. Is difficult, if not impossible, to appreciate without first having heard the brother's side of the story. The inner guidance of a living system is as necessary to its survival as oxygen and hydrogen. The governance of any system evolves covalently with the system itself. Everything from a blink to a cough to a decision to run for your life. Every faculty but language has the same history. The only rules of evolution that language follows are those necessary to its own construction. A process that took little more than an eye blink. The extraordinary usefulness of language turned it into an overnight epidemic. It seems to have spread to every remote pocket of humanity, most instantly. The same isolation of groups that led to their uniqueness would seem to have been no protection at all against this invasion, and both the form of language and the strategies by which it gained purchase in the brain seem all but universal. The most immediate requirement was an increased capacity for making sounds. Language seems to have originated in South Africa, and this requirement probably accounts for the Kliks and the Khoisan languages. The fact that there were more things to name than sounds to name them with. In any case, the physical facility for speech was probably the most difficult hurdle. The pharynx became elongated until the apparatus in its present form has all but strangled its owner. We're the only mammalian species that can't swallow and articulate at the same time. Think of a cat growling while it eats. Try it yourself. Anyway, the unconscious system of guidance is millions of years old. Speech? Less than 100,000. The brain has no idea any of this is coming. And conscious must have had to do all sorts of scrambling around to accommodate a system that proved perfectly relentless. Not only is it comparable to a parasitic invasion, it's not comparable to anything else. So much of this book is a philosophical debate dressed up as a conversation between patient and doctor. The entire book is dialogue. You can sort of infer the physicality of the characters, but that's really not important. It's noise compared to the juice. The juice, the meat and potatoes, baby. The real Italian seasoning. The fact that you have this character who, to most people, is insane. And yet her insanity is covalent with this brilliance, which is just stunning. But it's not surprising, because if you think about Cormac McCarthy, was very, very bright. He was a very clever guy. And I would say this, is that of all the various different references and points which Alicia brings up, because there are a lot of different references to philosophy, mathematics, the history of both, metaphilosophy, logic, all these different things, which you get a little bit of that in The Passenger. If we consider the project of The Passenger and Stella Maris, which I'm sure to McCarthy was all one, with The Passenger, you have more of his experimentations with character, because there are so many characters who just come in and start talking. And with Stella Maris, you have more experimentations of articulating a philosophy. And a lot of it, interestingly enough, is philosophy that McCarthy himself was fascinated with. Is able to follow these different references and allusions that the character is making is also you're kind of peering a little bit into the sort of things that were on McCarthy's mind. And here's the thing. You don't have to know any of this. You really don't. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have a degree in any of this stuff. But what you should do is there's a video out there. It's called Couldn't Care Less.
That's worth talking about, your experience with the McCarthy Foundation and the difference between the...
Yes, I found it. Couldn't Care Less. Cormac McCarthy in conversation with David Krakauer. It was recorded at SFI, and it is where he pretty much spells out some of these ideas and kind of understand where he was coming from. You have to watch this video. It's really, really good. There's a follow-up that he did with some other guy. Anyway, that one's not very good. I'll put a link to this one in the description. I highly recommend it. Go watch the video. Read Stella Maris.